I love being on the journey of asking questions and the audience looks at me and they go, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that before. That's like winning the golden ticket, because now I've proven some value in that conversation because I've asked something smart enough that takes them to a place of discovery. And it can be on a variety of topics. That's, I think, how you win influence, even at an up chain level of coaching and selling.
Are you struggling to get your senior team on board with your vision for change, to get buy-in for a new initiative, or maybe even to get leaders to sign on to your services as a coach or consultant? If so, you're not alone. Find out how to get to yes with your ideas and services with insights from my guest, Derek Roberts, on this episode of Chain of Learning. Welcome to Chain of Learning, where the links of leadership and learning unite. I'm your host and fellow learning enthusiast, Katie Anderson. And my guest today is Derek Roberts, who is here to help you understand how you can master the power of persuasion and influence by becoming a yes-minded persuader and getting to the yes that you want and need. Derek is a seasoned sales professional and consultant who has coached and trained tens of thousands of professionals to step into their impact by mastering the power of persuasion and communicating with integrity. He's the co-author of the new book, Listen to Sell: How Your Mindset, Skillset, and Human Connections Unlock Sales Performance, with co-author Mike Esterday, where they're both executive partners at the sales training organization, Integrity Solutions. Welcome to Chain of Learning, Derek.
Katie, thank you. It is a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. I'm excited for our conversation.
I am excited for our conversation too. And, I've recently read your book, Listen to Sell, and there's so many connections across how we can be more impactful as leaders, as change agents, and as consultants and sales professionals as well. I want to start off our conversation specifically on what, if any, difference between selling a product or service for someone to actually buy, or selling ideas and getting people to buy in to a vision or an initiative.
That's a great way to start, because so often people get hung up on this word selling, right? It's baked in with all kinds of connotations, history, experiences, and it can become a real obstacle to people. One of the things, whether you are actually transacting between businesses or individuals or just transacting on ideas, a lot of the fundamental principles are really still the same, because what we're doing is we're engaging human beings in sort of buying into a next step, whether that's a transactional next step or an actional next step to follow a journey. And so there are some really incredible parallels, and really the common denominator is human beings. This entire journey in the book, we really write this to people to engage people. We're not talking about bots, and we're not talking about AI and those kinds of things. We're talking about human communication. And so that's the starting point.
I really appreciate hearing that. There's so many people in the world that I exist in around continuous improvement and operational excellence, where we can get stuck on the tools and the process, which is also very important. You have, I'm sure, sales processes and tools that can really help and leverage the sales process. But really, it's ultimately about how are we engaging as human beings and having these conversations. You said something to me earlier, too. It's about engaging people in solution finding.
Yeah.
And that is really what we're all about, whether or not you're trying to solve an operational problem or create value for others. But how do we create solutions together?
At its core, that's really what selling is. It's identifying needs, meeting those needs, creating value in the process. And those needs can be on a lot of fronts, whether it's something that you're providing in order for somebody to do their business better, business transaction because they're selling something to their customers. We're a part of that equation. Or it could be something that makes their personal life better in helping them kind of advance in their career. Those experiences are really very similar. And so the person who is able to engage in, first and foremost, discovery of the need, and then leading to the solution. That's an interesting balance, because so often people in sales and even people who are in influencing roles, they're fixated on the solution. They're fixated on the deliverable. They want to tell, they want to push, they want to offer that end result, too often without bringing people on the journey that they first have to realize, oh, where I am is not where I could be or where I should be. And so we have a lot of the art of selling is creating that discovered need and getting agreement to the need so that the solution becomes something of value to them. And that gets backwards too often. And so that's why solutioning is important. How you get there is more important.
You hit the nail on the head. It's so much, I think that's a big challenge for internal change agents who can see the future. They see this vision. They want to get there. They know what better looks like, but sometimes forget to bring people along on that journey and to get the buy-in that's needed from the people doing the work, the executive team, the leaders that they're supporting, and more. Yeah. I'd love to explore this concept of buy-in and what it really means to get buy-in, what it is and what it's not, and why it's so important for bringing people along on this journey to get to the solution or the end result.
Buy-in's kind of like that magic experience where everybody's together and they're on board and they share it like it's their own idea, right? They're on board in their energies and their creativity. But getting there can be a challenge. In my consulting business, we talk about taking people on this journey, and we use this really simple little stick figure graphic. And it's the journey from resistance to buy-in. And you start out, and we have this little drawn wagon, and with all these little stick people in the wagon. And you have this leader out front hanging on to the bar at the front of the wagon, pulling the wagon. And that's the start of it. And so passive sort of, you're just there riding along. And that's a lot of leaders try to, hey, we're going here. And people are, well, I'm not sure I buy into that. Resistance is when they dig their heels in, right? You think of the old Flintstone cars and they put their feet down and they, instead of pedaling, they just dig in. And the leaders, because they're like, whoa, it's not for me. You clearly haven't won me. I don't see the value of it yet. I don't even know that I need to go there. Why are you trying to take me to that new destination? I like where I am, and I'm going to resist. Compliance is, okay, you know what? I'll put my feet up. I'll ride along. You can pull me along, but all the work is done by the leader, right? And so there is this, because I don't know that I believe in getting there. You haven't helped me understand the value. I'm not going to resist it, but it's what's in it for me. Yeah. Buy-in is getting out of the wagon and running up and saying, hey, let's go here. Well, how do we get there, right? We're all pulling this thing together. And here's how we get there. First of all, you've got to help me discover that there is a gap between where we are and where we're going that is valuable to me to fill. And so often, and this is true in straight sales, but it's also true in influential, the practice of getting buy-in to ideas, is I have to first engage the people that I'm trying to help provide solutions to in a dialogue that says, tell me, what is important to you? What is it that helps both of us understand that there's something worthwhile to address? And that's the interview process. And that's why we spend the bulk of this book talking about listening to sell, because the first thing I want to do is I want to ask some questions. I want to know real answers. And often in any kind of selling ideas, selling solutions, we know the answers, right? We know where we want to be. We know what the good outcome is. We're not as interested in hearing what the real issues are and the value proposition is for the people that we're engaging. So we start asking questions. We start asking real questions, and we open our ears up to hear what the real answers are. And the questions are not, what are you doing now and what could you do better? That's part of it. But a bigger part of it is, what's the impact of not doing this or doing this? And why should that matter? Real decisions get based on reason, right? They get based on, I do this because. And very seldom do we ask questions that actually get to the root of because. Sometimes we don't ask them because we don't want to know the answer. We're afraid of the answer because it might contradict what we're trying to accomplish. And so we have to spend some time getting people to go, you know what? There's something that could be better than what I'm experiencing now. And I didn't even think about it or know it, but I'm willing to explore it. And when you get them to buy into exploring it, now you can start talking about solutions. Now you can start offering opportunities. That's the demonstrate phase. But you have to have the interview phase first. And it gets missed a ton.
There's so many parallels in your book about coaching, about getting people to understand the current situation. It's all about those asking good questions, listening, and seeking to really understand.
Yeah.
And I think you touched on here the gap model that you talk about in the book,
Right.
which I thought was really powerful and really aligned with the way continuous improvement practitioners' brains work. We have a gap between what's actually happening, the target of what should be happening, and then let's focus on what are the reasons for the gap. What I loved is you talk about in the book, not just the logical questions, those what and how questions to define the reasons for the gap of where we are and where we need to be, but these emotional questions, the why, the what if, and getting to the heart of that emotional part of it is so critical for then moving beyond maybe that initial emotional resistance to that change. And I thought it was really powerful, call out the distinction between the logical process questions and the emotional sort of what's going to bring me on that journey with you.
And you need both, right? You need to understand what is happening, what is the substantive from where to where. That's important, right? If you're changing a process, what are we doing now? What could we do better? Why would it make a difference to us functionally? But you still have to navigate people through that. And we say emotional. I'll cut the distinction like this. The top half of that gap model, from where we are now to where we need to go, the top half of the gap model is what I call the what questions. It's kind of the tangible, practical, the things that you can put your finger on. And when you ask me what questions, how many of this have I used? What would be better? What could be, I can answer every one of those questions dispassionately, meaning I don't have to invest myself in the answer. I'm giving information. I can hypothesize a little bit. We can talk about all of that, but I don't have to commit to anything. But when you start asking me questions that I would call more why questions, right? You're asking me to take some ownership of these answers. What am I concerned about? What are the opportunities or the benefits that would come from this? What is a motivation? How do I prioritize things? So often you ask people to make decisions in these kinds of situations. I'll ask, if this and this, which of these are more important to you? Now I have to give you kind of a vested answer that says something about who I am. It's not just me revealing what's important, but it's me also evaluating, is it worth it to me? Those kind of why questions at the bottom half of the gap model get me to move to recognizing there's a need to change, or there's a need to move, or there's a need to buy, or to at least consider a solution. And once you have me there, now we can talk about solutions because they're relevant to me. That gets missed a lot, unfortunately, with a lot of folks.
I see this happening too. We talked about leaders bringing people along on their idea. A lot of people listening are also internal change agents and change leaders, leading initiatives, trying to get their actually executives on board with ideas and finding frustration like, God, I don't understand why, the executive team, they're like giving the blessing maybe for the project or initiative, but not actually making changes themselves or really being actively involved. The sort of ways you talked about earlier, the what's in it for me. And so helping leaders themselves see the change, maybe it's scary to I've been successful to a certain point of being this certain way, and now I have to change my behaviors or be involved in a different way. That's scary. And then that might come across as resistance, or maybe like the compliance in the sense, well, I'll go ahead with that, but I'm not really going to be involved.
Right. It's good for you. Don't include me. It's good for you though.
Yeah, but I totally support this continuous improvement initiative, and that's great. Everyone out there, go for it. You support them, but I don't need coaching. I don't need to be doing things. That's so hard, and that's really hard place. I know because I've been there myself for internal change leaders as well to be in. Is how do you coach up and bring those executives who are more senior in the org chart than you, but actually your role is to help them see the potential for the change and then lead it themselves. Because as the internal change leader, you're truly only leading with influence. You don't lead with authority.
This is the art of the intelligent question, right? Because if I'm asking really powerful questions, I'm getting a level of buy-in just through my questions. So if I'm focused on gathering information or getting approval or whatever those things are, then there's a chance that I can miss that. But when I go to a leader and I ask some really smart and insightful questions, like, if we do this, how does this impact our objectives here? I'm asking them to inform me, but I'm also asking them to process whatever it is that we're trying to accomplish through a filter. And that helps me understand what's important to them, and just even asking them in those things, explain to me what we're trying to accomplish here so that I can make sure we're doing the things that serve that. That is an absolute opportunity to be, first of all, it demonstrates sort of your engagement and leadership, even if you're not the final decision maker. You get to be an influencer because you've asked smarter questions. And I think the best questions in selling, and it doesn't matter what you're selling, I love being on the journey of asking questions and the audience looks at me and they go, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that before. That's like winning the golden ticket, because now I've proven some value in that conversation because I've asked something smart enough that takes them to a place of discovery. And it can be on a variety of topics. That's, I think, how you win influence, even at an up chain level of coaching and selling.
I really enjoyed a quote from the book, and this is related to this conversation here. It said, selling at its heart is not talking people into something they don't want. So it's this tension, right, between being persuasive and helping them get to that emotional connection of the value that they want it versus being manipulative or maybe sort of pushing your ideas on them. How do you help people kind of balance that tension between being persuasive and feeling manipulative or pushing?
There is a quote, and I don't know where it comes from, so you can't attribute it to me, but I've said it many times, that a person convinced against their will is of the same opinion still. Right? Yeah. Dragging someone along, you really haven't won the day if all you do is get them to do something because of force of nature. That's not leadership. That's not getting buy-in. That's not selling. What you have to do is find out what people value and then connect whatever it is you're trying to accomplish to what they value. And then they buy into that. Then they see that it's important. Then they see that it's worth it to them. It's worth it on what level? Maybe it's time, maybe it's money. I mean, it could be a lot of things that we evaluate cost or worth, but the journey first is to figure out what do they value. And that's honestly different for each of us at some level. We talk in the book about communication styles, and people have a right to buy the way they want to buy. And that has a lot to do with the way we engage them. But a step beyond that is we each prioritize things that are important to us. Some people prioritize prestige. Some people prioritize simplicity, accuracy, efficiency, whatever that might be, that they weigh out and go, okay, it's worth it to me because of this or that. And that is part of the journey that we have to be on, is to dig enough to figure that out, to find that out. And that doesn't have to be a long journey. A couple of really insightful, smart questions, or sometimes just being quiet and giving someone a chance to talk is the best way to find that out. The best questions are, I may ask you something and you give me an answer and I go, that's really interesting. Tell me a little more about that. Yeah. It's magic. It's what emerges is really the heart of value.
One of the things I coach people all the time on is ask that one question and pause, count to 10, because if you get uncomfortable, right? Someone's not responding right away. If you're asking a really good question, it's going to require some thought in a reflexive moment. And then we sort of pile on with more questions or starting to do that pushing because we're uncomfortable with that. I really like that you emphasize the listening part in the work that I do about how to ask more effective questions. But the corollary of that is really effective listening, right? You have to listen and hear and give space for someone to think. Otherwise, why even ask the question in the first place?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Years ago, and I don't know if it came to me or somebody helped me discover it, but I started changing the way I just view people. Think about your day. How saturated is your day? We've got kids, we've got businesses to run, we've got customers. I mean, we're saturated, all of us. And so you think about this, when I sit down to engage someone, maybe it's on a phone call, maybe it's face-to-face, maybe it's just sitting next to somebody on an airplane. For me to tell them something, here's the way I view them. I imagine everybody sitting there, and you kind of imagine, I call it the pitcher principle, but it's almost like a big pitcher of water. And we're all just at the top, maybe even brimming over. We're just full. How in the world is there space for me to pour anything else into that at the beginning? There's really not. And so one of my first objectives in engaging people is to make capacity, to get them to pour some things out so that there's room to take some things in. And that's the art of asking questions. When you engage people, the best way is just to get them to share, to tell me what's important to you so that now you have capacity to engage in potentially taking something in that's on, in addition to what you already know, because we're all just topped off every day.
Yeah. And going back to what we were talking about at the beginning is all about human connections and human relationships. At the end of the day, that's
right.
what this all is based on. And so the more we can have a genuine human connection on, even if it's at a very, short level, we're so much more open and receptive to then hearing other ideas later as well. But yes, I love that. Start with a question and get to know each other and really hear what's going on for that person.
Absolutely. And it may only be a few moments, right? Sometimes that's all you have in certain interactions. You don't have a 30-minute conversation, the luxury of that. You might just be able to create that really quick impression. And in our sales model, we talk about approach being the first step, because I want to make sure that I have permission to engage with you, right? And you have to know that I'm here and present and interested, and I value you, not to get something out of you, but because this is something that we're going to connect on. And if there's an opportunity for us to do more, great. If there's not, that's okay. I valued you in that moment, and we mutually recognize that, and then we can move on quickly. And so that's the starting point. Build that rapport, ask a good question, and then maybe we'll get to solutions.
I like how in the book, too, you talk about different behavioral styles. And you mentioned this just a bit earlier here in our conversation, and how important that is for being able to understand the person that you're engaging with and maybe flex your approach to best create that connection. I'm actually teaching something very similar to what you describe in the book at an upcoming leadership retreat for a healthcare client of mine. I'd love to hear some of your insights around how these behavioral insights and behavioral styles influence that connection and the conversation that we can have to be more impactful and persuasive as well.
Yeah, thanks for asking, because I think this is the thing that is so easily accessible to people, right? We do our trainings and inevitably behavior styles bubbles up first, because everyone can relate to the fact that how they process information, how they want to be treated, and then they recognize the differences between them and the people around them. Sometimes they're coworkers, sometimes they're spouses, sometimes they're customers. But what it really comes down to is, how do we value people and recognize that, hey, we're all different. That's okay. But the onus of helping make this experience easy for you is on me. Right. And we'll call it the buying experience, right? Because that's specifically what we're talking about. But my job is to make it easy for you to create in such a way, not only the delivery of the information, but the way in which you want to process that information to get to some kind of conclusion. There are people who are very relational people. That they like people, right? They gravitate towards people, and we call those talkers for good reason.
Oh, yeah. I'm one of those.
Yeah, of course.
To listen.
And so in doing so, we're looking for connections. We're looking for ways to see not just how it impacts you, but talkers think about how things impact others, and they want to bring people along and they want to explore. And there's a lot of that energy. What's in their head comes out. What's in their heart comes out. And so the buying experience for them is connecting in such a way that they feel valued, because talkers want to buy from people they like, generally speaking. It's not just that we have to talk about your kids' soccer games on the weekend and things like that, but we should make space for that if that's important to them, because connecting with someone is at a talker level allows us to get to solutions. We could spend more time connecting and relating, and when it comes time to sort of buying into an idea or taking an action, a talker will go, oh yeah, that makes great sense to me. I'm good with that, right? Because you've invested on the front end of what they value. They value that relationship. You take the contrast of that, a controller, someone who is more facts and figures and data, they're analytical, they are certainly less emotional. And what they value is accuracy, and they value efficiency, and they have value. So when I approach them, you know what I want to do is I want to make sure I net it out in the beginning. I get right to the heart of the subject, because that's what's important to them. And we talk about this distinction between Imagine a talker that you come and immediately out of the gate, you're talking about solutions, you're talking about bullet points. And I mean, a talker has all this pent up tension, like, what, you don't like me? What's going on? I'm freaking out. Interestingly, when you flip that equation around and you go to a controller, if you spend the first 20 minutes just building relationship with a controller, they have the same level of pent up tension. Like, why are you wasting my time? Why can't we get to the substance of this? And the gateway to business with a talker is through relationship. The gateway to relationship with a controller is first through business. If you get to a controller and you hit right on point bullets, and they see that you're valuing them and what they value, they're actually some of the friendliest people around. But you valued the way in which they want to buy and make decisions. We talk about doers and supporters as well, similar, but contrast urgency and energy.
And being able to understand the contrast is so important. I talk about how we have to, well, maybe for just the tellers, we have to break the telling habit and learn to listen and to show up in a different way and to give space. And so it can be really hard and challenging to relate to that other person because you're like, this is so opposite of me.
Yes.
And that's the power of creating that influence, especially even if, you're an internal change agent or a leader. How do you talk with the other leaders and how do you bring them on board and how do you get people's buy-in? And it's, I think back to some of my, just relating to the story you were sharing, right, or the examples you were sharing. Some of the challenges I had earlier in my career is because I was like so excited about all the things. And I was just like presenting that with the relational aspect. And that worked with some leaders and it didn't with others. And it was like a big shock to me, right? Like, what do you mean? I'm like this friendly, like smart person with the great ideas and I want to help you. Right. Yeah. What's going on? I'm excited. I'm going to work with this leadership team on this very same thing because it's such a critical leadership skill, not just for selling, but for any kind of influence that revolves human beings. We need to know how to relate and connect with each other so that we can get to that yes and that value that we're aligned on. We may actually ultimately want the same thing, but how we get there is totally different.
And doing it in a genuine way, because so often you can get these models and if I do it to manipulate, then ultimately I'm going to get a bad result because people can see through that. But if I genuinely am there to make it a good experience, to make it an easier experience for you, even though the work is on me, you might be relational and you have to bring that down and be really precision minded and shortcut, if not truncate, some of that connectedness that you want. But if you do it in the right way and you go, you know what? I want to make this easy for you. So let me do that. I'm going to sideline some of my natural tendencies because this is going to create a better outcome for you. That's incredible. That's invaluable to them. And you'll get so much further and faster. And they probably know how you are, right? They're like, wow, Katie really put it on the sideline to come and make this a great experience for me.
And you could even, do what I call labeling it. You could say to someone, I know we're short on time and I know how much you really value first covering all the data and the facts on the situation. So I want to start there and then we can move into other things. And so acknowledging that you even know that person, I think is a way to be authentic because you're acknowledging your own preference, but that you're showing up to help that other person or to guide the conversation that way.
That's fabulous advice, right? Great wisdom to call it out. And they do. They see that you really care about them. And behavior styles are a lot of fun.
They are. And they're very insightful. And especially when you get people on the opposite ends of the room, like the opposite poles and like, what annoys you about those other people? Okay, what biases do you have? And then what strengths do they bring to conversations and ways we approach things that maybe, are your blind spot? We need all of those styles together to really work effectively. I like in your book, Listen to Sell, that you talk about 3 different types of conversations, these asking and listening. The first conversation is a conversation with yourself. And I love that you talk about starting with purpose. Why is that so essential? No matter if you're, in a role called sales or you're in a role of influence within an organization, starting with purpose.
Yeah, I appreciate you calling that out because it was really important for us in shaping this book to speak to the person first, right? We're such advocates of the sales professional or leaders, but we recognize that just giving them tools, right? That engagement, what we call the conversation with your customer, is only a small piece of the equation, right? If I do the right things, but I'm not bought into it personally, or I feel out of sync, what we call out of congruence, then I'm probably not going to do it, or I'm not going to do it as well as I could do it, or achieve the things that I'm capable of achieving. So we wanted to speak directly to the person and say, first of all, what are you listening to, right? What are the conversations you're having in your head? Because they're powerful. Selling happens between the ears before it happens between people. And so you've got to understand, why am I showing up? What is it that I've connected as purpose and value? And that's different for every individual, and they have to define that. But we've created this model called our congruence model. And these are 5 things that we've noticed in folks over 50 plus years of doing this. What is your view of selling? What your role is, right? Call it selling, call it leading, view of coaching, view of service, you fill in. But how do you envision what that really means? We define it as selling is a noble profession, right? We want to elevate that because we really believe it's great. If that's out of skew, it's going to impact what you do with your time, how you show up, what you believe is capable. How do you view your own abilities? Do you have the skills? Do you have the tools? Do you have the knowledge? What about your own values? Here's an interesting one. Do the values that I represent align with the values either of the organization that I represent or the leader that I serve? Am I being asked to do things that are inconsistent with who I want to be? And any of us that have ever worked for a leader who, A, didn't value us, but also pushed us into areas that we thought were a violation of what we valued, realized that, A, pretty uncomfortable, if not miserable place to be. And 2, we probably don't last very long. The 4th area is commitment to the activities. Do I know what I need to do and prioritize accordingly? Do I find myself doing what we call tension relieving activities or results producing activities? And we all know these, right? We get in our day and we have all these challenges. And so how does purpose drive my day? Do I prioritize in such a way that I go, right, I am committed to outcomes because they move me towards my objective, my purpose, the reason that I show up? Or do I do the things that feel busy, that might make me feel good about time, but haven't really moved the needle? And sometimes salespeople and other people, we find ourselves doing those things that aren't actually productive. And if it's not grounded in some kind of purpose, then I'll waste a whole lot of time. I'll feel good about it, but at the end of the day, I haven't done anything. Yeah. And then the last piece, the 5th part of the congruence model, is the view of my product or belief in my product, right? What do I really believe I'm representing? Does it provide value for the people that I'm engaging? Or am I just hawking something, right? Is my focus more on what I get out of that or what I provide to them? So it is very deeply rooted in kind of what we believe internally, which then drives the behaviors that follow that. And that's a really important call out.
I used to have a bad, viewpoint of what selling was. And I realized I love selling if it's something, I don't like the word selling for whatever mental model hold up on that, but persuading or sharing opportunities with people, if I really believe in them, like my book or your book or others things, or because there's value in it, but pushing something where I don't necessarily believe in it, that's never been aligned with who I am. But if I believe there's value, I can speak to that value, and that really drives that forward. And so for same with change leaders, if there's something that you see there's going to be value in your organization for making the change, then speak with the passion about that purpose and how it connects to our purpose as well.
Yeah. I was just going to say, and don't miss your piece of that equation. And so often this is what we've run into with people who are influencers, salespeople, whatever you want to call them, is the idea is the focal point or the item that they're selling is focal. But you know what? What those people are buying is they're buying you as much, if not sometimes more than whatever it is that you're providing. You are a really strong delta in that equation. And if you own that and you go, look, my job is to make this an easy experience for you. My job is to adapt to the communication style that makes this journey from where you are to where you want to be one that is easy and connects to value and all that. That is actually one of the greatest value components of a buy-in or buying decision. And too often people miss that about themselves. And if they buy into that, they realize, wow, I actually control and bring a lot to this equation. If I'm a real student of this, if I really hone the craft of understanding my audience and connecting this and drawing out value and getting buy-in, then I've done my job in a really profound way because those people are buying into you and ultimately get a great result because of that. And that's a really big miss. And that's one of the things we really want to tackle here because we're after success of the individual, because success for the individual means ultimately success for the customer or the recipient, right? And that's what we tried to tackle in the book.
Yeah. And that goes for whatever you're selling, regardless of it's selling a thing, a service, an idea.
Right.
If you start with purpose and connect that purpose with the organization and the other people, it's so much more powerful.
Yeah.
There are two other types of conversations you talk about in the book. We've already covered a lot of the conversations with customers or clients. The third type of conversation, which I love that you emphasize, are coaching conversations and the power of coaching to better understand ourselves and help each other elevate our skills and so much more.
Yeah.
And there's some great coaching questions in the book. Derek, I have a question for you, though. What has been one of the most important shifts that you've had to make to become a more effective salesperson or yes-minded persuader? And how has coaching personally helped you to get there?
Oh, that's a great question. And so now you're getting personal.
Yeah.
Because I think seldom are we natural born salespeople. Maybe some people are, but most of us grow into it. And part of the reason we have to grow into it is because we have to recognize what we bring to the equation. And so part of the journey for me is recognizing along the way that I had to be more engaged in being curious. And that was not something that was particularly natural for me early on. Like many people, I got into selling, and you spend a lot of time getting to know your product and your services and things like that. And you go out and you try to get people to see the value in it. So for so long, I wasn't genuinely interested in them. And I'm ashamed to say that, but there's some truth in that. And along the journey, I had some great mentors and I had some good coaches that challenged me. One actually was my father. He was an IBM earlier in his career. And so he had a great model in watching him do this, but also just he is genuinely interested and I think genuinely curious. And I really started to recognize that. And then I had a couple of people along the way that took a chance to say, look, here's what you're doing wrong, and challenged me to stop and open my ears and think about the quality of the questions that I had. And all of a sudden, that's really probably not all of a sudden, progressively, I began to recognize that there's so much that is left undiscovered when we walk away from conversations. I would finish a sales conversation, I'd get back out to my car, I'd hang up the phone, and I'd have that, I forgot to ask about this, and I didn't know this, and I don't know who else is involved in this, and what's the priority, and how does this fit in the budget? There's so much that I wasn't curious about. And so really changed the way I started thinking about it. And what it really changed for me is my level of preparation. And I had some really good coaching about how much time and attention I spend before an engagement, being prepared to be present in the engagement. Because my preparation allows me not to have to think about, what's the next thing I'm going to ask and how would I carry this and how do I respond to that? No, I think about those things ahead of time. I capture them. And then I am entirely present in the discussion to hear what's said. This is the listen, right? To sell, to really listen to what's being said and go, wow, tell me more about that. What did you mean by that? And the second piece of this, and I had an older gentleman along the way, and he really challenged me. He said, what are you afraid to ask? I'm like, what do you mean by that? No, he said, you get in sales, you're asking questions you know the answers to or want to know the answers, right? You're presupposing certain answers by the quality of the questions you ask. What are you not asking that might be something you don't want to hear or might take the conversation a different way? And so I was really challenged to sort of examine what I was afraid to ask. And so I really had this attitude of sort of no fear questions. Like, I really want to know if you're using a competitor and you love them and they're doing something that we're not capable of doing. I want to know that, and I want to know that early so that I don't waste your time. But also I can go, ooh, that's something that I should pay attention to. I really genuinely want to know. And that was a real change for me because it challenged me to sort of set aside some of the fear of winning the sale to go, okay, if I understand this, I can be better, not just today, but in my growth all along the way. And I probably wouldn't have gotten there on my own. Maybe it'd take me a long time, but I had people challenge me along the way to think about that.
I love that. Be more curious, ask the questions that scare you, and also be prepared. So you're not thinking of that next question. One of my favorite quotes is getting ready to talk is not the same thing as listening. And so many coaches, I know when I start talking about, start learning how to ask more questions, they're so focused on what's the next question I'm going to ask. And then they're not even listening. So stay curious longer. All right, one final question for you. And there's so much more we could talk about. And I highly recommend people check out your book, Listen to Sell, because there's so many great nuggets in here that will expand on the topics and the points that we've talked about here today. But what's your best advice for change leaders who are really trying to influence change and bring forward ideas, either in a leadership role or an internal consulting role, to grow their skills as persuaders and help their organization get to those solutions?
If I had to boil it down to one thing, I would choose to concentrate my energy on preparation, right? That's a real hallmark of professionalism, right? If I want to be a professional in whatever role, a professional influencer, a professional salesperson, whatever that is, be careful that I just don't go in and shoot off the hip or assume certain things. Like, really put some effort into preparation. Know to your audience. Think about your audience. What's important to them? Observe, ask questions, do research, take everything in, and then process it as best you can through what you know and observed about them. And then try to approach them in the way that is the most impactful to their journey of discovery, not just my outcome. The outcomes come. If we do the things right, we get the results that we want, not every time, but certainly more often. But I would challenge anyone who's thinking about being influential is to be a student of their audience. Take time, prepare, understand, do the work. In a sales context, that is, use the resources at your disposal. There is so much information on the internet and on LinkedIn. I mean, you could be so prepared to business sales. Know an industry. Observe the audience that you're influencing in your organization or your leaders up. Be curious to understand what's important to them. And it will dramatically impact the kind of impact that you're able to have. And whether it's following our 6-step sales process, the 8-ink process, or using behavior styles, or all of these things that we talk about, those are, I think, helpful tools. But you have to choose to do it. You have to want to do it in the beginning. And I think that's where it starts.
Well, thank you, Derek. It's been such a powerful conversation and full of many questions and many idea exchanges. And it's been wonderful to have you here on Chain of Learning. How can listeners get a hold of you, know about the book and your services?
Thank you. The book, you can go to listentosellbook.com. That's a way to find the book. Certainly it's on Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, anywhere else that books are available. You can get it that way. But you can also, and we love to engage for folks that want to take the learning journey, right? The book captures some of the core concepts, but we take people through a training journey of learning the steps of communication, the steps of selling, the steps of coaching through our integrity selling, integrity coaching programs. You can find us there at integritysolutions.com. Please reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to engage in dialogue. I love communicating with leaders, influencers. I love hearing their stories and providing services. My business, Robert's Business Group, provides coaching and consulting for executive leaders, organizations. We train folks. I'd be delighted to serve them in any way. So, Katie, thank you for having me. It's an incredible delight getting to know you, spending time with you. We've done this, talked to each other now for several months, and very much was looking forward to today's conversation. I hope we get to do more conversations going forward. You're a strong leader in your own right. Your book is amazing, and I enjoy that too. I'll continue to encourage people to go read what you have to say as much as what we have to say. I think that's important.
Well, thank you, Derek. And it was also wonderful to be on the Mental Selling podcast, which is hosted by Integrity Solutions, which is how we got connected in the first place.
Yes.
So a real testament to how this chain of learning really grows together. So thank you so much for being on the show today. And I look forward to continuing the conversation.
My delight. Thank you. Take care.
Bye. Being able to lead with influence, to persuade others to adopt new ways of thinking and working, is all about relationships and conversations. To master these relational skills to engage with people in solution finding together. Regardless of your official role, or if you're advocating for ideas, a product, service, or even your own position in career growth, Your success hinges on becoming a yes-minded persuader. Reflect on this conversation with Derek Roberts on some of the core competencies of being a successful yes-minded persuader that we discussed, such as how well you listen with curiosity, ask provocative questions, prepare so that you can be present, connect the what's in it for me with what leaders desire, and adjust your approach to align with your client's preferred behavioral style. Consider Derek's own coaching feedback that propelled him to a new level of success, and consider, what question are you afraid to ask? And then lean into that question in one of your conversations this week and see what you and your client discovers. And if you haven't already done so, be sure to download my free Catalyst self-assessment that covers all 8 competencies that you need to master to become an impactful change leader. You can go to kbjanderson.com/catalyst, spelled with a K, and also go back to listen to episode 9 of this podcast to learn more about each competency. As Derek highlights in this book, we all need mentors and coaches to develop and grow. I encourage you to seek out mentors and coaches, formally and informally, who can help you grow and achieve even greater potential. And if you need outside support for yourself or your leaders from someone like me, I'd be happy to help. I love supporting change leaders, continuous improvement practitioners, and executives like you to grow into your impact and help you and your organization realize your vision for change and develop the relational and influence skills to get you there. You can learn more about my trusted advisor, coaching, and learning experiences on my website, kbjanderson.com. And of course, the link is also in the show notes. Be sure to follow and subscribe now to Chain of Learning and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can all strengthen our chain of learning together. And if you've enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and review it on your favorite podcast player. Thanks for being a link in my chain of learning today. I'll see you next time.